The night it happened still lives in my bones like a splinter I can't pull out. The rain had just stopped, leaving the street slick and shining under the sodium lights, when I heard the sound no parent should ever hear, a gunshot followed by my daughter's scream. I remember dropping my coffee, sprinting out the door so fast the screen slammed behind me. The air smelled of burnt powder and wet asphalt. In the middle of the road, her wheelchair lay on its side, one wheel still spinning. Lily was sprawled beside it, her pale hands trembling, a red stain blooming across her sweatshirt like some cruel flower. My knees hit the pavement before I even knew I'd fallen. "Lily, stay with me, please, baby, stay with me." My voice cracked, raw with terror. I pressed my hands against the wound, feeling the warm pulse of her blood against my palms. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some came out but stopped halfway, frozen by fear or guilt. And standing there at the end of the street was Karen, our HOA president, her hand still trembling around the pistol she shouldn't have owned, her eyes wide but unremorseful. She came at me, she muttered, voice shaking, I thought she was dangerous. Dangerous? My daughter couldn't even stand. My radio crackled from my belt, dispatch calling out, shots fired, units responding, and that's when it hit me, they were responding to my address. The badge on my chest suddenly felt like a weight I couldn't bear. I was the sheriff of this town, the man sworn to protect it, and yet I couldn't protect the one person who mattered most. Sirens painted the night in blue and red, the reflections bleeding across the white fence I built after Lily's accident. Every flash made her face flicker between life and shadow. I whispered her name over and over, my breath hitching between each syllable. Paramedics rushed in, shouting numbers, lifting her onto a stretcher. One of them touched my shoulder gently, but I couldn't move. My world had collapsed, and all I could hear was Karen's voice repeating, "It was an accident, I swear." I was scared, like fear could ever excuse a bullet. As they loaded Lily into the ambulance, I looked down and realized my badge had fallen into the street beside her overturned wheelchair. Its metal glinted under the rainlight, half buried in blood and mud, a cruel symbol of the line I could never uncross. That was the moment I stopped being Sheriff Daniels. From that second on, I was just a father with nothing left to lose. Before that night, our lives had a rhythm that felt almost peaceful, like we'd finally found a small corner of calm after years of storms. I'd spent 20 years in law enforcement, seen too many broken homes, too many lives ended over pride or anger, and all I wanted was to give my daughter Lily a world untouched by that ugliness. We moved into the neighborhood of Maple Ridge 2 years ago, a picture-perfect suburban community with freshly painted fences, manicured lawns, and an HOA that prided itself on maintaining standards. To me, it sounded like safety. To Lily, it was freedom, a place where she could roll her wheelchair down smooth sidewalks and wave to friendly neighbors without worrying about potholes or crime. She was 16 then, sharp-witted and endlessly patient, the kind of girl who found sunshine even in her shadows. After the accident that paralyzed her, I thought I'd lost her spirit, but somehow she carried more light than anyone else in that neighborhood. Every morning she'd sit by the window, feeding the sparrows and greeting the mailman like it was the highlight of her day. And for a while, it really did feel like peace had finally found us. Then there was Karen. The first time we met, she stood at the edge of our driveway, clipboard in hand, her smile tight enough to cut glass. "Welcome to Maple Ridge," she chirped, handing me a packet thicker than a Bible. Just a few rules to keep our neighborhood beautiful. I remember laughing lightly, telling her I'd seen worse paperwork in homicide reports. She didn't laugh back. From the start, she had that air, the kind of woman who lived for power in small places. She made every HOA meeting feel like a courtroom, every rule a personal crusade. The ramp I built for Lily? Not aesthetically consistent. The van with her wheelchair lift? Takes up too much curb space. But at first, I brushed it off. People like Karen thrived on control, I'd seen it before in uniforms and offices. I figured she'd get bored and move on. Our street looked perfect from the outside, kids on bikes, trimmed hedges, porch lights glowing like a postcard, but under that polish was tension no one talked about. Karen ruled with charm and gossip, turning small disagreements into neighborhood debates. Still, Lily refused to see the bad in anyone. When Karen once called her ramp an eyesore, Lily just smiled and said, "At least it's my eyesore." That's who she was, unshakable, kind to a fault. And I think that kindness made Karen hate her even more. Because Lily represented something Karen couldn't control: grace without authority, joy without power. I remember one evening, sitting on the porch with Lily as the sun dipped behind the cul-de-sac. She looked at me and said, "Dad, people like her are just lonely." I wanted to believe that was all it was, loneliness. But deep down, I knew better. In my line of work, I'd learned that loneliness can curdle into something much darker when it festers behind a smile. Back then, I didn't know that a war was already brewing right under our perfect streetlights, or that one day, the woman with the clipboard and perfect lawn would destroy the peace we'd worked so hard to build. It started small, the kind of petty friction you tell yourself isn't worth noticing. A warning letter about the non-compliant slope of Lily's ramp. A polite but passive-aggressive note taped to our mailbox about wheelchair marks damaging the grass. Karen always wrote in perfect cursive, every complaint wrapped in the sugary tone of community concern. I used to crumple the letters and throw them straight in the trash, telling myself she was just doing her job. But it didn't stop. Soon she was showing up at our door unannounced, clipboard in hand, inspecting the driveway like she owned it. "Sheriff Daniels," she'd say with that tight-lipped smile, "we have to keep the neighborhood consistent. Rules are rules." Her eyes would flick toward Lily's window like my daughter's presence itself broke some invisible code. Lily, ever the optimist, tried to make peace, baked her cookies once, even wrote a thank you card for keeping the neighborhood pretty. Karen took it with a forced grin and later complained about the scent of strong food odors from our kitchen. It was as if our kindness offended her. I began to notice the whispers at HOA meetings, little glances, muttered jokes about special privileges because of my badge. One evening, as I stood up to leave early for a shift, I heard Karen's voice behind me, "Must be nice to have the law on your side." That was when I realized this wasn't about rules anymore, it was about resentment. Her control spread like ivy, wrapping itself around every inch of the neighborhood. She'd fine kids for leaving bikes on the sidewalk, send warnings for unauthorized wind chimes, even dictate the color of people's flower pots. But with us, it was personal. She once photographed Lily's van parked a few inches past the curb and sent the picture to the HOA group chat, captioned, "Even the sheriff ignores the law." I confronted her after that, trying to keep my voice calm. "Karen, this has to stop. You're harassing my family." She tilted her head, all fake sweetness. "I'm enforcing order, not harassment. Surely you, of all people, respect order." The smugness in her tone made my hands clench. I wanted to remind her how fragile order looks when you're standing at a crime scene, how rules don't mean much when hearts are breaking. But I bit my tongue, for Lily's sake. My daughter still waved at Karen every morning, pretending none of it hurt. Yet, I could see the way her smile faltered whenever Karen's curtains twitched. The hostility became a presence, something you could feel in the air, a chill beneath the summer sun. Karen's resentment had curdled into obsession, feeding off every ounce of control she could steal. And though I didn't know it yet, that bitterness was already looking for a place to explode. In a neighborhood full of trimmed hedges and polite smiles, it only took one bullet to reveal what kind of monster was hiding behind them. It was a Friday evening in late spring, the kind of night that smelled like rain and barbecue smoke, when the world feels harmless for a few quiet hours. I'd just gotten home from a long shift, unbuttoned my uniform shirt, and was sitting on the porch with a glass of sweet tea while Lily played with our dog on the lawn. The neighborhood was alive with its usual Friday rituals, kids chasing each other with water balloons, porch lights flickering on one by one, music floating faintly from someone's backyard. For a moment, everything felt right. But then I saw Karen. She was standing at the end of the cul-de-sac, arms crossed, glaring toward our yard like she was watching a crime in progress. Her voice cut through the calm. "Sheriff Daniels, can I have a word?" I sighed, told Lily to go inside, but she shook her head and kept tossing the ball to the dog. I walked halfway down the driveway to meet Karen, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Evening, Karen. Something wrong?" She gestured sharply toward the curb. "Yes, actually. Your van is parked too close to the hydrant." Again. Her voice had that clipped precision, every syllable sharp as glass. I looked over. The van was 2 feet from the hydrant, perfectly legal. "You're reaching," I said quietly. "It's fine." She scoffed. "Oh, of course you think it's fine. The sheriff doesn't follow rules when they don't suit him." I felt my jaw tighten. "Karen, it's been a long week. Let's not do this tonight." But she wasn't backing down. Her eyes flashed with something mean, almost triumphant. "You think this neighborhood belongs to you because of that badge? You and your crippled daughter." That word hit like a fist. I didn't even realize I'd stepped closer until she stumbled back a half step. "Don't you ever talk about my daughter like that," I said, my voice low, shaking more from restraint than anger. Karen's face twisted. "Then keep her out of the street," she snapped, pointing behind me. I turned. Lily was rolling her wheelchair toward the edge of the road, chasing after her dog's ball that had bounced across the asphalt. It all happened in seconds. Karen's hand went into her purse, and before I could even process it, the gun was out. The muzzle flashed, one sharp crack splitting the night open. The sound echoed off the houses, scattering birds from the trees. For a heartbeat, everything stopped, no sound, no breath, just the metallic smell of gunpowder hanging in the air. Then Lily's cry broke through, small and sharp, and the world crashed back into motion. I remember screaming her name, running, my feet slipping on the wet concrete as I reached her. Her wheelchair was tipped over, her body crumpled beside it. The ball she'd been chasing was still rolling slowly toward the gutter. I dropped to my knees, hands shaking as I pressed them against her chest, trying to stop the bleeding. "Call 911. I yelled, but no one moved at first, just gasps, frozen faces behind glowing porch lights. When I looked up, Karen was still standing there, the gun dangling loosely from her hand, her face pale but not horrified, more like she couldn't decide if she'd won or lost something. "Why?" I shouted, voice cracking. "She's a child." Karen stammered. "She scared me, she was coming at me fast." "I thought, you thought?" I barked, disbelief burning through my throat. "You thought my paralyzed daughter was a threat?" She blinked rapidly, hands trembling now as she dropped the gun onto the curb. Neighbors began to emerge, phones in hand, recording, whispering. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years telling people to stay calm during shootings, to wait for law enforcement, and now I was the law, helpless and begging for help. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with every second. I cradled Lily's head against my chest, whispering that she'd be okay, that Daddy was here, that everything would be fine, lies I needed to believe as much as she did. The paramedics arrived, blue lights splashing across the street, cutting through the rain that had begun to fall again. They lifted her carefully onto the stretcher, and I caught her hand, cold and slick with blood. "Stay with me, baby," I whispered. "Please." As the ambulance doors closed, I looked back at Karen, soaked, shivering, mascara streaked, muttering the same words over and over. It was an accident, it was an accident, but no matter how many times she said it, the echo of that gunshot told the truth. That night, the perfect illusion of Maple Ridge died, and so did the man who believed this neighborhood could ever be safe. The hospital smelled like bleach and fear, that sharp, sterile air that clings to your throat and never lets go. I don't remember how I got there, One minute I was watching the ambulance disappear down Maple Ridge, the next I was standing in the ER hallway, my hands still stained with Lily's blood. The nurses moved fast, their voices a blur of medical codes and clipped urgency. BP dropping, move, move. One of them tried to guide me to a waiting chair, but my legs wouldn't bend. Through the glass window, I caught glimpses, blue gloves, 4 lines, scissors cutting through her sweatshirt. I'd spent half my life on crime scenes, but nothing prepared me for watching my daughter fight to stay alive under fluorescent lights. When they finally wheeled her past me towards surgery, I reached for her hand, still warm, still my little girl, and whispered, "I'm right here, baby. Daddy's not going anywhere." But she didn't open her eyes. Hours crawled by like years. I sat in that waiting room staring at the tile floor, counting the seconds between the beeps of distant monitors. The badge clipped to my belt felt like a joke now, all that authority, all that training, and none of it could stop a bullet. Reporters started calling my phone within an hour. Somehow the story had already leaked: HOA president shoots sheriff's daughter. The headlines twisted everything, made it sound like a misunderstanding between neighbors instead of an act of hate. On the local news screen above the vending machines, Karen's face appeared, wrapped in a blanket, crocodile tears streaking her cheeks. I was terrified, she sobbed to the camera. She came at me so fast. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. My fists clenched so tight my nails cut into my palms. That woman had stood over my bleeding daughter, and now she was painting herself as the victim. The hospital security guard looked at me cautiously, like he wasn't sure if I was going to explode or break down. Truth is, I was doing both inside. When the surgeon finally walked in, his expression said more than his words ever could. "She made it through surgery," he said quietly, "but she's not out of danger." The bullet missed her heart by an inch. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat burning with gratitude and rage all at once. They let me see her for a moment, pale, fragile, her chest rising slow and shallow under the web of tubes and wires. Machines breathed for her now. I sat beside her, gripping her hand gently, whispering the same promise over and over: "You're strong, Lily. Stronger than her. Stronger than me." Outside the window, dawn began to break, painting the sky the same color as her favorite blanket, soft pink fading into blue. It should have felt like hope, but all I felt was helplessness. Because somewhere out there, Karen was home, sleeping in her own bed, while my daughter lay trapped between life and death. And I knew then that if justice didn't find her, I would. I thought the worst was over once Lily made it through surgery, but I was wrong, our nightmare was only shifting shape. By the second day, Karen had already started twisting the story. She hired a lawyer before the blood on the street had even dried, a man slick enough to make poison sound like reason. At the hospital, I sat across from detectives I'd trained myself, watching them hesitate to meet my eyes. "We have to treat it like any other case, Sheriff," one of them said, voice low and careful. I nodded, though it felt like swallowing glass. The chief called later that evening, tone wrapped in bureaucratic silk. "Off the record, you might want to let this play out quietly. We don't want to turn this into a media circus." A media circus? My daughter was lying half alive under a blanket of tubes, and they were worried about optics. By the end of the week, Karen was free on bail. The press called her a frightened HOA president traumatized by an unexpected encounter. They showed her crying on her porch, neighbors hugging her, bringing casseroles like she was the victim. She told every reporter the same rehearsed story, that Lily charged at her, that the lighting was poor, that she only fired because she feared for her life. People ate it up. A few even started whispering that maybe I was using my badge to influence the investigation. I'd seen manipulation before, suspects twisting facts, politicians spinning truth, but this was different. This was personal. Every headline felt like a knife turned a little deeper. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, not to condemn her, but to reassure residents that Maple Ridge remains a safe and law-abiding community. Karen sat at the head of the table like a queen reclaiming her throne. When I walked in, the room went silent. Her lawyer nodded politely, that smug little smirk just daring me to lose control. "Sheriff," he said, "we're all praying for your daughter's recovery, but please understand, this was a tragic misunderstanding." My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. "A misunderstanding?" I said quietly. "She shot a child." Karen flinched but said nothing. The board murmured platitudes about forgiveness and community unity, and I realized justice wasn't just slow, it was being suffocated. That night, I sat alone in my truck outside the hospital, watching the rain trail down the windshield. My reflection stared back at me, tired eyes, unshaven face, the hollow look of a man who'd lost faith in the system he built his life on. I wanted to believe the law would do its job, but the law was built by people, and people like Karen always knew how to twist it. Somewhere between the legal statements and the press conferences, the truth was bleeding out. And as I watched those courthouse lights flicker through the storm, I made myself a promise: if the system refused to deliver justice, I'd deliver it myself. Revenge didn't come to me like fire, it came like frost, slow and deliberate, numbing everything until only focus remained. I stopped sleeping. Every night, after sitting with Lily until her monitors settled into their steady rhythm, I'd drive back home to my office and start digging. If the system wanted to play blind, I'd make it see. The first thing I did was pull the 911 call logs from that night. Karen's voice was on the tape, trembling but calculated: "There's a suspicious person in the street." I feared for my life. Suspicious person, she couldn't even say my daughter's name. I forwarded the audio to a private analyst I trusted, a retired dispatcher who owed me a favor. Within hours, she confirmed what I already knew: the call was made after the gunshot, not before. A lie, time-stamped and preserved. That was my first brick. Next came the surveillance. Maple Ridge prided itself on being secure, which meant cameras on almost every porch. I went door to door, badge tucked away, knocking softly in the middle of the night. Some neighbors hesitated, afraid of HOA retaliation, others handed me flash drives like contraband. By dawn, I had footage from 3 angles. One clip showed Lily's wheelchair glinting under the streetlight seconds before the flash. She wasn't even near Karen. Another showed Karen stepping into the road first, arm extended, eyes locked. Cold intent, clear as day. I spent hours piecing together timelines, matching muzzle flash to echo, bullet trajectory to streetlight shadow. Every frame burned into me like a scar. Then came the witnesses. 2 kids across the street, maybe 12 or 13, had seen the whole thing from their bedroom window. Their parents were terrified of getting involved, worried Karen would sue, that the HOA would blacklist them. So I met them quietly at the diner off Route 9, no uniforms, no badges. They told me what they saw: Karen shouting, pointing, firing before Lily could even speak. I thanked them, paid for their milkshakes, and left with the weight of their truth in my chest. That night, I typed up everything, every lie, every contradiction, and printed copies for evidence I couldn't risk losing. But the hardest part wasn't the investigation, it was pretending. Pretending to be calm when officers asked me to let the process work. Pretending not to hear Karen's lawyer on the radio claiming she was deeply remorseful. Pretending to trust a system that had already decided who deserved sympathy. I kept my anger sealed behind routine, polished badge, clean shirt, steady voice, because I knew one crack and they'd call me unfit. They'd say grief made me reckless. So I smiled, nodded, and gathered my proof in silence. By the time Lily opened her eyes again, weak, confused, whispering my name through cracked lips, I had a folder an inch thick, filled with truth sharp enough to cut through every lie Karen had spun. I kissed her forehead and promised her that the woman who took her peace would never again sleep soundly. It wasn't vengeance that drove me anymore. It was something colder. Justice, stripped of faith, driven by the simple, quiet vow of a father who'd seen too much of the world's cruelty and was finally done forgiving it. It only took one leak to burn the whole facade down. I didn't plan for it, but maybe some truths have a way of escaping no matter how tightly you try to hold them. A week after I'd finished gathering evidence, a local reporter named Jenna Morales showed up at the station. She'd covered my cases before, tough, honest, allergic to spin. She'd heard whispers that something didn't add up in the Maple Ridge shooting. I didn't hand her the file outright, but I didn't stop her from finding what she needed, either. All I said was, if you're going to tell the story, tell it right. 2 days later, the footage hit the evening news, unedited, raw, undeniable. The first clip showed Karen stepping off the curb, gun already drawn. The second showed Lily's wheelchair lights flickering from 20 feet away, nowhere near her. Then came the sound, Karen yelling, "Stop," before firing, not in fear, but in fury. The anchors didn't even have to dramatize it, the truth did that on its own. Within hours, the town that once treated Karen like a saint was calling her a monster. Social media exploded, #JusticeForLily trended statewide before sunrise. People I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me, outraged, apologetic, ashamed. By morning, Maple Ridge was in chaos. HOA members called an emergency meeting that turned into a shouting match. Some demanded Karen's resignation, others claimed they'd always had doubts about her leadership. The same people who once enforced her petty rules now treated her like a disease they didn't want to catch. I didn't attend that meeting, but someone recorded it. The video showed Karen red-faced, yelling that the footage was doctored, that I was orchestrating a smear campaign. When someone asked how a teenage girl in a wheelchair could possibly threaten her life, she froze, stammered, then stormed out. That clip went viral too. The court of public opinion had reached its verdict long before the legal one ever could. Meanwhile, I stayed silent. No interviews, no statements, no press conferences. I let the facts do what my words never could. Every night, I sat by Lily's bedside, phone lighting up with news alerts, watching the empire Karen built crumble piece by piece. Her sponsors withdrew their support. Neighbors who once brought her baked goods now crossed the street to avoid her. Someone spray-painted "Monster" across her garage door. The HOA removed her name from the board roster within 48 hours, citing ethical concerns. But the real turning point came when the county prosecutor, under immense public pressure, reopened the case. He called me personally, "We're filing new charges, aggravated assault with intent to harm." I remember staring at the phone, not sure whether to smile or break down. It wasn't victory. It was gravity, the weight of something finally shifting in the right direction. Karen was arrested again that same evening, escorted out of her spotless White House while cameras flashed and neighbors watched from their porches. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. When I finally left the hospital that night, I walked through Maple Ridge in silence. The once perfect lawns looked different now, less like symbols of pride, more like the stage of a lie finally collapsing. I didn't feel joy, not even relief. Just stillness. The kind that follows a storm. Karen had built her kingdom on appearances, but the truth doesn't care about fences or bylaws. It finds its way through cracks, through cameras, through conscience. And this time, it found her. The courthouse felt colder than I remembered, not from the air, but from the weight of every stare fixed on me when I walked in. Cameras lined the hallway, reporters whispering like vultures waiting for a headline. The State vs. Karen Whitmore hearing had drawn half the town. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with tension. Karen sat at the defense table, dressed in gray, her usual arrogance replaced with a practiced frailty. Her lawyer whispered in her ear, but her eyes kept darting toward me, maybe trying to read whether I'd already forgiven her, or if I ever could. The prosecutor, a young woman named Daniels, no relation, rose and began her presentation before the grand jury. She played the footage I'd fought so hard to gather, clip by clip. The room fell silent when the muzzle flash lit up the screen. Then came the slowed playback, Karen's hand steady, her stance deliberate, no panic in her posture. You could hear a collective intake of breath when Lily's voice cried out. Even the jurors looked away. The prosecutor let the silence hang heavy before she spoke. This was not fear. This was control. This was intent. Karen's lawyer tried to twist it, claiming it was fight or flight, a tragic split-second error by a woman terrified of a perceived threat. But the truth was undeniable. Every angle of that video told the same story, not a moment of panic, but of choice. When the forensic expert took the stand and confirmed the bullet trajectory matched an aimed shot, not a reflex, you could feel the atmosphere shift. The same people who once defended Karen now couldn't even meet her gaze. When it was my turn to testify, my voice felt foreign, hollow but steady. I told them what I saw that night, the sound of the shot, the look in her eyes, the silence that followed. I didn't raise my voice or ask for sympathy. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than grief ever could. I ended with one line, simple and raw: she didn't fear my daughter. She feared losing control. After hours of deliberation, the foreman stood and read the decision: indictment on all counts, aggravated assault with intent to kill. The courtroom erupted, half in gasps, half in quiet relief. Karen's knees buckled, her mask finally cracking as deputies moved to take her into custody. Outside, the crowd was waiting. Some cheered. Some cried. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward like weapons. I said nothing. I just looked up at the sky, gray, unmoving, and thought of Lily's voice the first time she called me Dad after her accident. The world wasn't fair, and justice never erased pain, but for the first time since that night, I felt something close to balance. Not peace. Not yet. But the first faint shadow of it. The trial began under a gray sky, the kind that pressed low and heavy, as if even the weather knew what kind of reckoning was coming. The courthouse was packed, neighbors, reporters, strangers who had followed every headline. Lily sat beside me in her wheelchair, pale but awake, her left hand trembling against mine. She wanted to be there, she said, to look the woman who broke her life in the eye. When Karen entered, the room seemed to hold its breath. Gone was the polished perfection, the tailored blazer, the clipped smile. She looked smaller, hollow, like all her power had evaporated in the glare of truth. Still, when her eyes met mine, something flickered there, defiance, maybe, or the ghost of it. The judge called the session to order, and just like that, months of pain condensed into a single heartbeat. The prosecutor laid everything bare, every recording, every frame of footage, every contradiction in Karen's story. The jury watched in silence as the screen replayed the moment of the shooting, this time in slow motion. The gasp that rose when the bullet left the barrel was almost physical, a ripple of shock running through the benches. Karen kept shaking her head, whispering to her lawyer, but the evidence drowned her out. When the prosecutor finished, she turned to me. "Sheriff Daniels," she said softly, "you may take the stand." I'd stood in plenty of courtrooms before, but never like this. My badge felt like lead. The oath I swore sounded different when the truth I had to speak came from a father, not an officer. "Tell us what you remember," the prosecutor prompted. My voice came out rough at first, but it steadied as I spoke, about the rain, the sound of the shot, the way Karen's face looked when she realized what she'd done. "I've seen people lie to save themselves," I said, eyes locked on Karen, but she didn't lie because she was scared. She lied because she believed she could get away with it. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the lights. I could feel every word hanging in the air, sharp enough to cut through years of arrogance. Then the prosecutor handed me something, a folded piece of paper, edges creased from being held too often. "Your daughter asked that this be read aloud," she said. My throat tightened. I unfolded it slowly, Lily's handwriting small and uneven from the tremor in her hand. "Dear Ms. Whitmore," it began, I don't hate you. I think hate is the thing that made you do what you did. I hope one day you see what it cost, not just to me, but to yourself. I forgive you, but I'll never forget. And I hope that hurts, because maybe that's what makes people change." By the time I finished, the room had dissolved into quiet tears. Even the judge's gavel didn't break the stillness that followed. Karen stared at the floor, her mascara running, her lips trembling as if words were fighting to escape, but none could survive the truth. When it was her turn to testify, she tried to cling to the same narrative: panic, confusion, fear, but her voice cracked under its own weight. "I didn't mean to shoot her," she said, sobbing into her hands. You thought wrong," the prosecutor cut in, her tone calm but unrelenting. "You thought your authority meant your fear mattered more than her life." That line hit like a hammer. Karen looked around, desperate for sympathy, but there was none left in the room. The jury's faces were stone, their silence louder than any accusation. In closing arguments, the prosecutor spoke simply. "This case isn't about a mistake," she said. "It's about power. A woman who believed rules gave her the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. And a child who paid the price." She turned to the jury, then to Lily. "Justice isn't revenge. It's remembrance." The verdict came after only 4 hours of deliberation, but those hours felt endless. When the foreman stood, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts." The words rang out like a bell, final, echoing. Karen crumpled, her body folding into itself as deputies moved in. Lily squeezed my hand, whispering, "It's over, Dad." But as I watched them lead Karen away, I realized it wasn't really over. Justice had been served, yes, but peace was something entirely different, something that doesn't come from verdicts or applause, only from time. Still, as the gavel struck and the courtroom began to stir, I caught Lily's reflection in the polished floor, strong, steady, unbroken, and for the first time since that terrible night, I let myself believe we might get there someday. When the verdict was read, the room erupted into the kind of noise that felt both holy and hollow: sobs, gasps, whispers colliding in the air as if the entire town was exhaling the truth it had been holding back for months. Karen sat motionless, her face pale and empty, as the judge pronounced her sentence: 20 years in state prison without the possibility of early release. I didn't cheer. I didn't even blink. I just watched her hands shake as they cuffed her, that familiar arrogance gone, replaced by something almost human: fear. Lily's hand found mine again, her grip soft but steady. "It's done," she whispered, and in that moment, I wanted to believe her. But as the courtroom cleared, I realized justice never feels like victory. It feels like standing in the ashes of something you once loved and realizing the fire's finally out. Outside, the courthouse steps were swarmed with reporters, microphones thrust forward like weapons. "Sheriff Daniels. Do you have a statement? Do you feel justice was served? What message do you have for the community?" I said nothing. I'd spent my entire career speaking for victims. This time, silence said everything. Lily and I walked past the cameras, past the crowd holding signs that read "Justice for Lily," down to where the car was waiting. Behind us, I could still hear the hum of questions chasing after us, but I didn't look back. For the first time, I didn't need the world to see what we'd survived. We already knew. In the weeks that followed, Maple Ridge changed in ways I never thought possible. The HOA board disbanded under public pressure. The state launched a full investigation into their conduct. Emails surfaced, petty complaints, discriminatory remarks, proof of the rot that had festered under the veneer of community order. The same neighbors who once looked away from Karen's cruelty now came to our door in tears, carrying pies, flowers, apologies they should have spoken long ago. Some I forgave, others I just nodded at, too tired to decide. The mailbox that once held Karen's letters of fines and warnings now filled with cards from strangers, people thanking Lily for her strength, people saying her courage gave them the nerve to speak up in their own small battles. Still, at night, I couldn't sleep. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to the sound of phantom sirens, heart pounding like that night all over again. Sometimes I'd walk to Lily's room just to watch her breathe, just to make sure she was still there, still fighting. She'd catch me sometimes, smile faintly, and whisper, "Dad, we made it." And maybe she was right. We did make it, but survival doesn't erase scars, it just teaches you how to carry them. The day Karen was transferred to state prison, I drove Lily to physical therapy. As she practiced moving her arm, sunlight poured through the window, casting gold across her hair. I thought about all the years I'd spent upholding the law, believing justice was something clean, something final. But watching her laugh with her therapist, fragile yet unbroken, I understood the truth: justice isn't about punishment. It's about reclaiming what pain tried to steal. And though the world would always remember Karen's name for what she did, I knew one thing for certain: my daughter's strength would outlive her sentence. Months passed, and time began to move differently, slower, quieter, softer around the edges. The chaos faded first, then the headlines, then the whispers. What remained were mornings filled with the smell of hospital coffee and the sound of Lily's laughter echoing down the rehab hallways. She had come a long way. Her hands no longer trembled when she gripped the parallel bars, her voice no longer cracked when she talked about that night. Every inch she pushed forward felt like a small miracle stitched out of pain. I sat through every session, sometimes silent, sometimes cheering under my breath, memorizing the sound of her determination, the soft grunt when she steadied herself, the way her eyes narrowed like she was daring the world to try and break her again. She never let it. Neither did I. Maple Ridge changed too. The house that once belonged to Karen was sold, its perfect lawn gone wild, vines curling up the porch rail like nature reclaiming what pretense once owned. No HOA, no board meetings, no letters taped to doors, just neighbors learning to speak kindly again. The street that once echoed with gossip now echoed with kids playing basketball in the driveways, their laughter free and unmonitored. Sometimes, when I drove home after visiting Lily, I'd slow down by that spot where it all happened, the curb where her wheelchair tipped, the stain long washed away but never forgotten. The new family there had planted daisies along the sidewalk. Lily's favorite flower. One afternoon, during a therapy session, the sun streamed through the tall rehab windows, bathing everything in a gold so warm it felt like forgiveness. Lily turned to me, sweat shining on her forehead, and whispered, "Dad, I think I'm ready." "For what?" I asked. She smiled. "To go home." I didn't realize I was crying until she reached up to wipe my face. That night, back at the house, I took my badge, the same one that had fallen into the street beside her that terrible night, and set it on her desk, right next to her framed hospital bracelet. "I'm done wearing this for justice," I told her softly. "From now on, I wear it for peace." She nodded, her eyes glistening. We sat on the porch together as the sky burned orange, the neighborhood quiet for once. The breeze carried the smell of lilacs, and the world, for the first time in a long time, felt still. I knew life would never be the same. Scars don't vanish, they just become part of the story, but in that moment, watching my daughter breathe easy under the sunset, I felt something I hadn't in months. Not vengeance. Not sorrow. Just peace. And for a man who'd spent his life fighting for order, that peace, fragile, earned, and real, was the only legacy that truly mattered.